everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Houseman, and welcome to 10-Foot Pole, a podcast dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 29. Here we are almost to the end of Season 3. It's wild.
How many... I guess I haven't been introduced yet, but how many?
30.
3 seasons, 30th season?
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So you're deep in it at this point.
Yeah, it's great.
I like that.
It's so great, and it gets better every year, every guest, every time. I'm impressed and amazed, and
it's so good.
I'm just in awe of what we get to do with this. Like, it's awesome.
Well, it's really love it. When it starts happening, it just takes off. Like, it just kind of builds off of itself and builds off of itself.
Well, that's also kind of what happened is, like, I just was, like, doing this thing, and then someone's like, you know that actually, like, we like this.
Oh.
You should like
no, do more of this thing.
Yeah. What if we pay you to do this? Sure.
That's a real sign.
Yeah,
that's
I'm
a real
here
sign.
for it.
People are into it. It's when they actually want to send you money for it.
Yeah. I mean, how often does the church just like reach out and be like, hey, we want to give you money?
Yeah. We're into this. That happened to us on campus this year, and once again, I haven't been introduced yet, but so we're just like talking without knowing who this voice is, which I like. But that happened on campus. Like, some group came to us and be like, hey, we have grants available. We like what you're doing. You should apply for these grants on campus. And we're like, excellent. We would like this when people just want to give us money for things that we didn't have to do anything or know about.
I love that. So our guest today is Pastor Andrew Rickel, who is the campus pastor at Grace House.
Yep.
So Lumen, our Lutheran campus ministry site at Georgia Tech in Atlanta.
Yep. According to my Synod Council, I'm a few other campuses, but...
Oh, right.
Yeah, so we do a little bit of Emory, and then, like, on paper, we're at Georgia State and Agnes Scott, but haven't quite figured out the angles there yet. So.
I get that. The same thing happens in Charleston. Like, we have College of Charleston, and then also technically on my paperwork is MUSC, so the Medical University of South Carolina, and then the Charleston School of Law.
Oh.
Which...
Didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, no one knows. No one's ever interacted with any piece of them, but, like, they're a couple of blocks away, so we're like, wow, we'll put them on our paperwork too. So
I think that's the way it worked in Atlanta. It's like, we have these other schools, and
that's why they're like, oh, well, you're LCM at the College of Charleston. I'm like, no, we are LCM Charleston, because technically we are multi-campus, and we're still working on like figuring out what that is going to properly look like. Yeah.
The problem is that Atlanta's really big, and it turns out it takes a long time to get anywhere in Atlanta from any other part of Atlanta.
Yeah.
As they say, like, Atlanta's an hour away from Atlanta, and that's what it is. Feels like.
Wow.
I mean, like, Georgia Tech to Georgia State's fairly close as a crow flies, and like driving maybe like 10, 15 minutes, but like Georgia Tech to Emory will take a good solid 45 minutes to get across town. And like, it'll be an hour out to Agnes Scott from Georgia Tech's campus. So like, it doesn't make any sense to group these, but that's besides the point.
It's more of like church resources and what they think is like, well, you're the closest person.
You're the closest, so you're the one.
You're the closest breathing body to this. This is now your job.
This is yours now.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you for joining us.
Oh, yeah, great to be here.
So, Rickel and I don't think I've ever called you Andrew. It feels weird.
That's fine.
Just
It's happened most of my life.
Okay. Rickel and I are sitting at the end of the Lumen Conference for those who are professional staff, so pastors and ministers and deacons for Lutheran campus ministry sites from around the country. It is my favorite conference.
Oh, yeah. This is by far the best.
The absolute best. And I know I'm probably going to offend someone out here in this world.
Because you haven't been to that other Synod assembly in that Synod?
I mean,
that is great.
My Synod assembly is actually pretty awesome.
You still go for Delaware, Maryland Synod assembly? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. That's solid.
Yeah, it is solid. It's pretty awesome. Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, there it's a pretty awesome.
It's a good one to be. Having grown up in the Delaware Maryland Synod, it is a great synod to be.
Oh yeah, that's right. These people might like, because they do have a lot of listeners. They're like so they maybe know who you are. They're like, oh man, he's one of ours. We raised him up.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, my dad was in the synod. My dad's a Lutheran pastor, so we were in the greater Baltimore area for like probably 25-ish years or so. And so grew up there, but like definitely grew up at Marley Ridge, and that's where I'm heading on Sunday. So driving up to Maryland. on Sunday. Elijah's going to his second year at Marley Ridge. So
I love that
really
you live
fun.
in Georgia and like you don't do any of the Novus ways. You go all the way back to Marley Ridge.
We did last summer, and it was mostly just like the Luther Ridge schedule did not line up with our like family calendar this summer, and we're like, well, we're already going to be in Chapel Hill. It's only like 5 more hours up to Maryland. So like, what if we just did that?
Well, at this point in time, we're just halfway there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot closer. I mean, like next
Sunday,
I'm
your family's
dreading.
like somewhere in town?
Yeah, so they my in-laws are like a little north of like the Triangle, and so they're up hanging at the lake with the in-laws
this is things that
week.
People don't really care about. I don't think I realized that like your family was just like in town,
just hanging around.
Yeah, that's cool.
It worked out really well because my father-in-law was in the hospital, so this also up in Durham, so it worked out really well that I could kind of pop up and help him out a little bit and all that. So
life things.
But life things. But no, we're going up, hanging out the lake for a couple days, and then driving up to Maryland for the week. Nice. So it'd be really good. So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, good. I love Marley Ridge.
It's so good.
So I mean, very exciting.
My parents dropped me off there in like second grade, and I missed one summer for the next like 25 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, that was my place. So.
No, I hear that. The same thing. So my camp that I grew up going to is called Camp Shalom, and it's just north of the Quad Cities in Iowa. And like my first summer, I actually like hated it.
Okay. Yeah. My first year was terrible.
And I told my parents, and I was like, they're like, how's camp? I was like, it's terrible. I don't want to ever go back, whatever. And they didn't listen to anything that I said, and sent me back again next year anyways. Yeah. And I was the best thing that ever happened to me, and it changed 100%. My life, and literally changed the entire trajectory of my life
100%.
By doing that.
Yeah.
Another thing that changed the trajectory of my life was this conference.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I remember, like, I had this idea of what a pastor was.
Okay.
Like, it fit in, like, a particular box. And
yeah.
I knew I don't fit in this box. This is not a person that I am capable of being, nor do I really want to be, right?
Yeah.
And I remember going to my very first Lumen conference, and, like, there was this surreal moment where... I'm just going to say it. So we went out after one of like our days of sessions. Yeah. I mean, we were in Chicago, right? Okay. So we went out, and a couple people we were with like really wanted to go to some gay bars. So we went to neighborhood in Chicago, which is like pure gay bars.
Yeah.
And we ended up in this one gay bar that was like gothic or having a themed party or whatever. Okay. And it's like everyone was dressed by vampires covered in blood. And I'm standing there and like I'm with 4 pastors. One of whom is just like as wild and free as it gets. The other one is like, imagine a Buddhist yoga instructor dancing in a flowy linen skirt, and then a guy that looks like Mr. Clean, literally just like tapping in his circle. And I just remember thinking, I was like looking around this scene in this room and being like, these people don't fit into any of those boxes. This is not whatsoever. Yeah. And I remember I called my wife. I don't know if it was later that night or the next day, but I called her because she was like, well, how's the conference going? Because this is like the very first time that I've professionally ever been in a conference. I wasn't ordained yet, any of those things. And I was like, I found where they're hiding all the cool pastors.
Yeah, 100%. It's the best
This is
secret.
A whole room of people that don't fit into this pastor box, but they're all pastors, and they're all like really amazing. And I was like...
And they're all very different and very unique and very
Every
individual.
single one of them are special snowflakes. This is where all the special snowflake pastors are.
Yeah, my first Lumen conference was Boston. I think that's where I met you for the first time, like officially, like new like
because I was helping
presence.
They'd keep making me help lead things.
They keep pulling you into things. And I remember having a very similar. I mean, we weren't out at a gay bar, for goth night, but like definitely just like looking around the room. We've been to gay bars since at these, but like just looking around the room of just being like, oh. These are all just really
all of
phenomenal
these people have in common?
Yeah, and it's one of those is like you could do like the one of these things is not like the other, but that's all of them, right? They are all so very different people and so very different pastors, and like absolutely love each and every one of them. And like I think our Region 9 gathering is pretty great, just because I'm a little biased about it, but. Getting here to see everybody from around the country.
I actually feel like really blessed to be a part of like Region 9 now. Like I was like, wow, I didn't know this is where they kept the extra cool pastors. But no.
That's the thing, Like, Region 9 is fairly extra when it comes to a lot of things.
It's true. So that conference was the very first time that I ever could envision myself actually being a pastor.
Nice, yeah.
Like people had told me or whatever, like, as a camp counselor, you always have those pastors that come for confirmation camp. They're like, have you ever thought about seminary? I was like,
whatever.
And because again, like they all still fit in that box. And so like, this was the very first time that I was like, oh.
Yeah. This is something, more here. Well, that was so that was part of my big everybody has their discernment story that you have to tell like a million times. But that was a part of mine was that like my dad's a pastor. Everybody always was asking if I was going to be a pastor, but like it was really going to camp. But like it was after like working at camp for multiple summers to be like I like the outdoors, but I don't love the outdoors. Like, this is okay, like a couple weeks out of the summer, but like, I don't really want this life, and I'm not about that. And then I was like, I like kids, but I don't think I love kids. And so like, I don't think I'm really here for the kids per se, but it was the staff. And like, I realized it was like that age range, the like 18 to 24-year-olds that were on staff was like who I enjoyed working with and like where I felt the spirit most alive and like all the things that were happening. But like, it was like camp got me halfway there, but it was a realization of like, oh yeah, I'm not wanting to be a parish pastor. Like, First Call was fine, and like I love that place, and it will always be near and dear to my heart. But like, I was looking for campus ministry as soon as I could to get out of First Call for like exactly these reasons.
But just like knowing like who you are, what your gifts are, and how to best utilize them. And I think that's what I've really discovered is the beauty of the incredible diversity, actually, of clergy that we have, right? Of understanding that like everyone is different and everyone has different gifts, and how do we best utilize those gifts that God has given us in the church. And so like again, like there are people that are like really good at parish ministry. There are people that are incredible like hospital chaplains.
That's for sure.
And for a lot of us, like that would be a very difficult thing to do every day.
CPE was interesting, but like I'm glad to be done with never doing hospital chaplaincy.
There's just people that like fit into certain things, or and so it's when you know what your gifts are, and you know like where you, and I think that's the thing when you come to this room and you look around all of these special snowflakes and you're like, what do all of these people have in common? And there's like that weird quality of like, oh, I can see how you can connect well.
You have that like relatability, and I think that's what it is. Is like you have a groundedness. Yeah. That's fair. But no, I think that's what it is, because like it feels like in campus ministries, it's really the opportunity for people to explore what they want to try to make a ministry into, because like no two campus ministries look alike. No. Like, and
that's always
cliche.
the
It's
thing.
a line that they say: "If you've seen one campus ministry, you've seen one campus
ministry." I don't think I've ever been to an event where they don't say that at least once. Yeah.
But I think it's
true.
like it's cliche because there's something behind it. Because like each one of us is vastly different than the
even
other.
just campuses are different, right?
Oh,
so like
true,
I went from my last campus was the smallest of 3 state schools, and it was about 11 to 13,000 people.
Wait, where was this?
University of Northern Iowa.
Oh, okay.
And it was, kind of fitting into that mold. Yeah. And then, I'm at the College of Charleston, which is 11 to 13,000 students. Yeah. It's the smallest of the 3 state schools. Yep. It is vastly a different place.
Charleston is probably also very different from Northern Iowa in a lot of ways.
You're correct. They don't have a lot of things
not a lot of
in common. Nope, not even a day of weather.
Yeah,
is
nothing's the same.
I always like talking to people in Charleston because like they don't understand, and I was like, well, you don't understand like in the month, because I don't know, I don't remember what it was, but it was something like in the month of January, like I remember this one winter in the month of January, it literally never got above 0.
Oh no.
And they were like people couldn't like.
That is not something they can conceptualize.
No, not even a little bit. They're like, they're just like, what?
Like, not even a touch.
I think it was like a couple Christmases ago, it was like it got down into the teens, right? Like, and it like overnight, but like during the day, it was like still in the 20s, and like everyone was freaking out and whatever, and we were just like, what?
Yeah. Atlanta shuts down if it gets below 30. Like if it's below freezing, Atlanta shuts down because it's a phenomenal to witness, and just like from the outside, like. But also one of our interns last year, and she's coming back this year, she's from like northern Montana, and like we were on Zoom calls in like February, and I'm sitting outside in like shorts, and she's like, it's -10 here today. I'm like, that's not a real temperature. Like that is not a real thing. And she was like, I cannot also conceptualize it being like 65 degrees in February. And I was like, just come on down to Atlanta and see what that's like, because it's wild.
It is. Love it. It's so it's, I mean, it's fun for me, right? Like I'm still the same person.
Yeah.
But also like have to approach things differently because like the people are different, right? And it's like, okay, well, great. Let's shape this for this new group of people. What does this look like? What do they want? And then also the most beautiful thing about campus ministry is like every 2 to 4 years.
Yeah, it all turns over.
You're like, your whole congregation is basically different. And they may want different things or new things, or they're looking for different things out of your ministry, right? Mm-hmm, and so for those of us that are ADHD, that's really nice, right? Like it's so-and-so hasn't been doing the same thing for 20 years. Like none of that exists. And so that's like,
Yeah, I feel like that's part of like the rut I got into. Like, I did a little bit of my first call before I was ordained, and then a couple years after. But like that was the rut that I fell into. Is just being like, okay, well, we have
nothing's changed.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, we stay in the same thing for a liturgical season. Great, we're gonna do setting 2 for all of the green season, and we're gonna go through these texts. And like I just got to this point where I felt like I was preaching the same thing every week, and we were doing the same thing every week. And maybe that's probably on me. Like,
yeah,
that's probably me just not being creative and being lazy. But like, I just felt hard to like feel like there's something fresh coming around all the time.
Yeah.
And like the Bible studies, not the Bible studies were the same, but like all the rhythms of the church just got to be so repetitive. And like campus ministry is great because every semester you have a different group of people coming through. Like folks study abroad, folks go on internship, folks graduate. Like it is a different group.
You have what I like about campus ministry is like there's a really kind of set flow and cycle to the year. Mm-hmm. But none of it is monotonous or consistent in any way, shape, or form ever. Mm-hmm. Like even if I like try to make consistency, it doesn't exist.
Don't force it. Don't force it.
It's the thing. It can't happen. Right? Like it just doesn't.
Not going to. But no, then 100%. Like you have the rhythms of the year. Like you have. I don't know about College of Charleston, but like football season's its own season on campus. Like
basketball season,
finals season, like midterms, like it's spring break before after, like. It has its own like course and movement and all that kind of stuff. But then they all go home at the beginning of May, and that's also really nice because it gets real quiet for a while, and having that like peace that comes with it too is always something I look forward to, and always really nice. Yeah,
it's like a built-in kind of like reset time. Yeah. And I know a lot of like campus pastors will take their like vacations during that like early May of sort of like, here's my time to like take my time.
Yeah.
Deanna, and I can call her out in it because she would not mind, is the campus pastor at Northwestern in Evanston, Illinois. And she said, she's like, every year at the end of the semester, I just like for 2 weeks take me time and unplug to reset, to recharge, to fill my cup before then going into summer orientations and being like, okay, what's next?
We're back in it again.
Yeah, we're back in it again. Because you were like, people were like, oh, you have the whole summer. I was like, no, you don't.
No.
You have like maybe 2 weeks, and then it like...
Then it's all happening. And then also, especially if you have kids. Like for me, that's the nice part about May is that like I have a 6 and an 8-year-old, so they're still in school to the end of May. Like Georgia gets out hella early. Like they get out at like Memorial Day weekend is like the end of school in Georgia every year, so it's stupid early.
We got way before that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
And they're starting in July this year, so that also feels very weird. Like I often say I'm not very patriotic, but like starting school in July is just un-American. Like they start like
un-American.
It's like July 30th they go back this year or something like that.
Why? I don't know. That's like an extra month of school.
Yeah. Well,
very
so like,
confused.
So about every 6 to 8 weeks there's like a week off of school, so like they have a lot of extra time.
Wait, is this your kid's school or is this my college?
This is my kid's school and all that. Yeah. No, Georgia Tech doesn't start till like August, August 15th, 16th. Yeah, in there. But my kid's school starts then. But it's nice that like the month of May is like graduation at Georgia Tech's always at the beginning of May. Like it's usually like Cinco de Mayo weekend or like whatever in there. And then
that's what it was.
Then my kids aren't done until Memorial Day weekend. So like I have the entire month of May just to be like I can zero out, I can bottom out, like I can just like get that rest recovery time when they still have someplace to be all day and we're not shuttling back and forth to camps and all that kind of stuff.
So here's an Iowa thing, and so maybe this is I don't know if it's patriotic for the country or patriotic for the state of Iowa, but Iowa schools don't go back to school session until the Iowa State Fair is over.
Yeah.
Like that's a thing. Like, and a few years ago, for the very first time, a few of the school districts, like in the more urban areas, who like aren't necessarily like fair people, like they started going earlier, and like it was such a hullabaloo that people were like school is starting before the fair. Like I can't believe you would do this.
Wow.
And it was a whole deal.
Well, that was a whole thing in Maryland for a while. I mean, I think like Governor Hogan like did some sort of executive order so like schools wouldn't start to after Labor Day because like Ocean City was getting like destroyed like tourist wise, and I think like I don't know if people still go to the Maryland State Fair or not, but like it was more like the beach.
I've been.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. I love it.
The Maryland Fair looks like a county fair in Iowa.
Oh yeah, of course. I'm sure it's small time.
Very much. It was fun.
It was fun. We had a good time.
We Iowans went in there and laughed and had a corn dog.
That sounds about right. But it was for like all the beach travel. So like I guess like they lost out so much on
that same concept, right? Like you're paying attention to like the entrepreneurship of your state, right? And that's
you got to stay focused on that.
We are so far off topic.
We can say so. I can also say something just as wise though about like Georgia schools starting is that like so much of like especially rural Georgia like places don't have air conditioning, so it's also like a movement to get kids into the building.
That's
during some of the hottest months, which does seem like kind of like a justice way about it.
Yeah. That was. I remember it being a thing too. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Wait, what are we here to talk about?
Oh man, I mean it's getting real great here. It's only going to get better from here because we're going to talk about some beheading and death. So
metal.
Cheers. Rickel and I, Pastor Rickel, and it feels really formal. And
Pastor Rickel sounds weird because that feels like my father.
It does, it's very formal.
So it could either probably be.
Does it feel Pastor Houseman? I was like, who are we talking to?
Don't know who that is.
I do spend a lot of time in Episcopal circles. Mother Houseman, please don't ever say that again. Please don't ever say that again.
I did CP at Georgetown in D.C. and the amount of times I got called father around Georgetown, I was like, I'm not going to correct you because that just feels like kind of an asshole thing to do. But like, I'm not a father.
Mother Houseman.
Yeah.
Nope,
Mother
absolutely
Houseman,
not. That's no, thank you.
No, thank you.
Anyways, we are going to talk about the gospel lesson for Sunday, July 14th, which is Mark 6. Verses 14 through 29, and it is the beheading of John the Baptist. I'm going to read it from the Common English Bible today, which is a mild difference. I usually do the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition, but this is a good one too.
I'm a net person myself. The New English Translation. I don't know. Mark Vitalis Hoffman got me on it at some point. I don't know why, but
that's fair. I mean, like if VH
says something,
if VH says you should read that one, then he's probably
I took
right.
a look at
Agreed.
it. I kind of liked it, so I stick with it.
Well, maybe I'll look at it then. Again, if VH says it,
there's something to it.
There's something to it. Okay. Herod the king heard about these things because the name of Jesus had become well known. Some were saying, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and this is why miraculous powers are at work through him. Others were saying, he is Elijah. Still others were saying, he is a prophet like one of the ancient prophets. But when Herod heard these rumors, he said, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised to life. He said this because Herod himself had arranged to have John arrested and put in prison because of Herodias, the wife of Herod's brother Philip. Herod had married her, but John told Herod, it's against the law for you to marry your brother's wife. So Herodias had it in for John. She wanted to kill him, but she couldn't. This was because Herod respected John. He regarded him as a righteous and holy person, so he protected him. John's words greatly confused Herod, yet he enjoyed listening to him. Finally, the time was right. It was on one of Herod's birthdays when he had prepared a feast for his high-ranking officials and military officers and Galilee's leading residents. The daughter of Herodias, note this is not Herod's daughter, the daughter of Herodias came in and danced, thrilling Herod and his dinner guests. The king said to the young woman, ask me whatever you wish and I will give it to you. Then he swore to her, whatever you ask, I will give you, even as much as half of my kingdom. She left the banquet hall, and said to her mother, what should I ask for? Her mother replied, John the Baptist's head. Hurrying back to the ruler, she made her request. I want you to give me John the Baptist's head on a plate right this minute. Although the king was upset because of his solemn pledge and his guests, he didn't want to refuse her. So he ordered a guard to bring John's head. The guard went to the prison, cut off John's head, brought it on a plate, and gave it to the young woman, and she gave it to her mother. When John's disciples heard what had happened, they came and took his dead body and laid it in a tomb. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Every time.
Yeah.
So you're new here, and so you don't necessarily know, like, almost every single time I read something like that. That's what happens.
Yeah.
My guess is always like, praise to you, O Christ. Because that's typically the readings that we talk about, right? The ones where you're like,
is this the good news?
Is this the good news? I don't know. It's... So for listeners who want to dig some deeper into, I think, some of the history and stuff like this, I encourage you to please go listen to Season 1, Episode 14, where I talked about this with Matt Fulcomer-Leonard, who at the time was a vicar and is now a pastor. So he is we had a great conversation talking about all of the Herods because there's such an incestuous family situation going on, which like aids into it, and that's also why I made it clear that like Herodias, the daughter is Herodias' daughter, not Herod's daughter, her new husband, and would have been Philip's daughter, so his brother, so like technically his niece. But the whole thing that's like the problem is because like Philip was still alive and like just kind of stole his brother's wife. Yeah. And it's a whole deal. It's
another whole scene.
Yeah.
Another one of those
everyone's
praise you, O Christ.
Yeah,
At the end of that one is like because that's the whole Jesus is teaching about like divorce and all that kind of stuff, right? Is that what it is? Okay. Yeah. No, it's a strange one. I mean, that's one of those is like I'm sure at some point somebody sat me down like in some New Testament class and explained to me all the Herods, but like that did not stick whatsoever. And then
I also like to say that because I think that people don't necessarily understand that there's multiple, like that Herod is more of a title rather than a name. And so like when we talk about like Herod in some stories versus Herod in other stories, it's not necessarily the same person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like I don't believe this is the same person who also was responsible for Jesus' death.
No.
That was his son, Herod Antipas.
But this is the same Herod from Slaughter of the Innocents? No, this isn't the same one as Slaughter of the Innocents?
No. Okay. There's more than one Herod.
That's a different Herod.
Right. Again, because there's so many Herods, like we can't even keep them straight. But I think in the episode that I did with Pastor Matt, we did, because we did go through all the Herods, because there's Herod the Great, but then he has lots of kids, right? Yeah. And so like he's got Antipar, Alexander, Aristobulus, a lot of, and then you got Herod Philip. So like technically even, so, it says here Herod's brother Philip. Yeah. Well, Herod's brother is still technically Herod Philip.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's Herod Archelaus. Yeah. Like there's a lot. Like there's a lot of things that are happening, and they also like hate each other, and I think some of the sons kill the dads. It's a whole deal.
But this is like one of those times though that this is like a stand-in. I mean, this is like a stand-in title to like recognize that like this is a local ruling authority that is in bed with Rome.
So that's actually like an important, I think, distinction here. So one of the things about the Herods, so they live in this like weird kind of liminal space. Yeah, so they are. They are Jewish rulers on behalf of Rome. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is like...
Yeah, you like kind of have one... You don't even have like one foot on both sides. Like you're pretty firm on the Rome side.
In a way that like... And I don't know if this is a good way to explain it or not. It might be a terrible way to explain it. It's sort of like... Imagine that you have the... formerly enslaved folks in, say, South Carolina, Georgia, whatever. Yeah. And, like, you see where I'm going with this, right? And, like, so they, we've decided we're making them citizens, quote, or whatever, but in a way that, like, we still keep them as second-class citizens, but we promote a few of them to be, like, the rulers of their kind, so that those people almost end up being white people in their representation of what they do and how they act. Does that make sense? Yeah. No, would you agree that like that's kind of like the way it's kind of being set up and where the position that the Herodian family is in?
Yes. I think 100% that's how kind of I've always
And they're living into it, right? Like
they know they get all the riches that come with it.
Yeah, they 100% are selling all of their souls to Rome.
100%, yeah. I mean, it feels very similar to like, be it some of these, post 9/11 places we've gone into as the United States of being like, we're going to like promote your like local people to be the rulers. I mean, it's not even like post 9/11, like it goes much farther back, but like kind of almost putting in these like Banana Republic places and like, we're going to like lift you all up, but it's still underneath like U.S. control. Like it is still this idea that like you are a local, so like they identify with you and people see you and you can garner some trust there, but like you are actually just kind of a puppet behind some other type of imperial power and all that. And that's what seems like what's going on here in this moment. It's because like Herod seems to enjoy John, which like I think is something that like maybe I haven't paid as much attention to as before, but like for whatever reason I thought like
they're also different kinds of Jews. So I'm not sure what John was.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what community he came from.
I don't know.
He was just like the desert guy, but like that. But he wasn't like
Zechariah. Like we could probably come up with it. I'm just not like I'm blanking at the moment. Like where
you thinking more like what tribe, or was he like a zealot, or like some of these other like more like separatist groups, or like was he a Maccabean? Like was he like a part of one of those?
So the Herodians were Maccabeans.
Oh yeah. Okay.
So that's what was different. Okay. Like that's what. So like they kind of were. outsiders
Yeah.
in the community. But then, because of their relationship with Rome, got like promoted.
They got brought back in.
So like then the Maccabeans were like above everyone else. And like that was a huge thing. But
and they were also okay with violence too. I think that's also the thing too, is that like, and I think that's, I mean, I think we're going to get into this a little bit. Like there's a couple different types of like metal passages, and this is kind of a metal passage, but like this is an incredibly violent text and like incredibly violent like moment. And I think that's what it's pointing to as well, is that like this idea that
also
like
a lot of violence and just like and it's not necessarily just the violence against John. Like I think that there's some other violence that's happening in there. Like the daughter is clearly being used in multiple acts. Like she's clearly being sexually exploited, as well as then put in this sort of position with her mother, on top of like why the mom wants to have John the Baptist beheaded, and like Herod, and putting them in that situation. And so
there's some great storylines going on here. I mean, this is like reality TV is like at its primo. Like this
is like soap opera.
Yeah, and 100%. 100%. I oftentimes this has been a recent thought that I've had a lot, because weird side conversations, but like to make like some of these things into like WWE like wrestling plots, I also think would work very well as well. Like I think there's really something about like the turn of characters and how people are playing parts and all that. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of violence of a variety of forms that are going on here, and exploitation of folks that are going on here. But like this isn't one of those like good metal verses where it's like stabbing like tent poles through people's temples or like anything like that. This is like one of those bad slaughter the innocents, pharaohs, all that kind of stuff side of things. I don't know.
So I also just like, I really love John the Baptist as like a person. Like he just like gave zero shits and was like, no bitches, get your shit together. Yeah. It's all coming down.
It's all coming down.
And and even like Jesus didn't talk the way that John did, right? Like, and it just...
It was like it seems like everybody has that like person that's always just like one step farther out than they are, and they're like, okay, but let's bring it back to center just a little bit here. Like John, I think you might have been a little too far.
I know pastors like that. Be like,
it's just rain you in a ton.
Yeah.
Like we're not all going to go move out into the middle of the desert and eat locusts and wild honey and all this kind of stuff like that. If that works for you, go for it. But like, don't think we're going to follow you out there. But
so in a different gospel, and some people have different opinions about like meshing the gospels into one story, but so in a different gospel, in the Gospel of Luke, we find out that John is actually Jesus's cousin. So they are indeed kin, at least according to the Gospel of Luke, right? But this comes from the Gospel of Mark. But just like, so to put that in perspective of like what this means in the grand scheme, like when and where and how John fits into things, to recognize that he is also a part of this lineage. Yeah. So we've talked about this on the podcast before, recognizing and understanding that like there's a bunch of different tribes, there's a bunch of different Jews, there's a bunch of different people throughout the story that have their own relationship with Yahweh, with God, right, with Adonai, and have their own like lines, but that the particular like biblical narrative that we have in our canon follows one particular line of people. Yeah. And so this is about their story, about their lineage, about their trace, about their covenants and relationship with God, very specifically. And that's important to know, because like sometimes, when we like talk about, well, God said this and blah, blah, well, he said it to those people that, like, or like, what I'm saying? Like it's in a place and time that we don't sometimes remember, and also remember all of these other people that God also is in relationship with.
Yeah. I mean, without going all into like the inherency of scripture, like whatever, like rabbit hole that would be, like, I mean, that's oftentimes how, like, when I'm talking with students, how I relate scripture and how like I understand truth in scripture is like, these are, people trying to relate faithfully how they understand Yahweh interacting in their lives and in their world. But this is just like one people's story, and this is just like one angle of a story. And
what can we learn from it? What can we learn about God? What can we learn about the relationship, right? Like, to me, that's what we take from these stories, right? And anyway, so I think like here so this puts John like in the same line of people, right, and following the story, and so he is proclaiming like this thing that is to come, right, which which we now take to be Jesus, right, and so he gets in the situation, and again, so we've talked about like John's a little like farther out there than some people, like there is no grace, there is no mercy, there is like this is the way that it is, and you have broken all the rules, and like this is the way. 100%. Yeah, he's a Mandalorian. For sure.
For sure.
But like The hardcore Mandalorians, not like the cool women Mandalorians.
Not that one at all.
No.
The
That's the kind of
hardcore,
Mandalorian that I am for sure. Like,
for sure.
I would also, we've had a rabbi on the podcast recently, and
Yeah.
so we talked about the different kinds of sex, the current sex of Judaism, right?
Yeah.
And especially in the United States. And I would say so, like that the like hardcore Mandalorians are like the Orthodox Jews, and then you have like the chicks that whatever,
the folks
like
who take off their helmets, and all that. Yeah.
They're like the conservative Jews,
Yeah.
right? Like I would put that like to put
that
it in
works.
retrospective. Like, does that make sense?
Yeah,
Is it
100.
totally.
Yeah.
Anyways, John's not one of those people.
John's not one of those.
Not even a little
but
bit.
Herod is interested in John, which I always find to be very fascinating
Yeah,
because like for
yeah.
as far
He's
out as he is, like
perplexed.
he's perplexed. Like
Yeah,
he
he's
like listens, he's confused by it.
So he's paying attention to what he's saying.
Yeah.
He's not just some other street prophet.
Yeah, he's not just some other street
Like this
prophet.
ruler is like, oh, what is this guy about?
And it's not just falling on deaf ears, which I think is interesting as well. So like it seems like at least Herod
I
is.
have my power. I have my place. What do I need of you?
Yeah.
Right? No, he's like, oh.
And I think and I think that's the interesting thing because like I don't know what it's like for y'all on campus, but like at Georgia Tech there aren't a lot of progressive Christian groups. Like we are the lone progressive, like we are the lone LGBTQI affirming group. But like that means the rest of campus looks at us in a very strange way. And I think that's such an interesting thing that like especially from like a Christian discipleship standpoint of being like if you're following the way that you feel like God is calling you to live and be, and maybe that's eating locusts in the woods, or maybe that's just hanging out with sinners and tax collectors and prostitutes, like it's going to look weird to the world because it's so unconventional to the world because it doesn't fall into this like reality TV like motif and all that kind of stuff, but it falls into something that is very different and like sets people apart in a way, or like will set a group or people or a community apart of being like there's something different going on here. And I might not understand it, but I'm kind of curious and I'm kind of perplexed by it and kind of want to lean into it a little bit.
Yeah, and you get that sense that Herod's like, all right, what is this about?
Yeah.
But like because of their family drama. Like,
the family drama.
It's also like we don't get a real conclusion, right? Like because of their family drama, they behead John, right? And so like Herod, we never get to hear, does Herod develop his faith?
Yeah.
Does this Herod anyways, like does he develop his faith? Does it go further? Does he seek out any more understanding?
Yeah.
It was sort of just like a political move, right? Like he had to follow through and behead John, even though he himself seemed to be curious. He himself seemed to be interesting. And I think that's the piece that another one of the pieces, like when I sit with this, because like if I would just read this, I would have no idea what I'd preach about, like without like having to sit and do some serious being like, once again, like, praise to you, O Christ. Well,
like,
what?
Yeah, this is the good news. But I think for me, I think what's going on here is like, once again, just another one of these motifs that we get throughout scripture where we see like power having to sacrifice the vulnerable to retain power, right? And that's really what it feels like for Herod to be able to keep up his empire and keep up his wife and keep the family happy and all that kind of stuff. Like somebody's going to lose a head. And here this time it's John the Baptist. And we see that pattern.
I took a class in seminary called Faith and Film.
Oh, yeah. That sounds cool.
It was really cool. So I took it because, well, first of all, I love film. I love good films. I'm also like quite stricken by a lot of good films, right?
Okay.
Like, and even in this class, like we looked at those kind of films, and
I feel like I've heard you talk about iRobot before. Was this?
Yes.
Was iRobot in this class?
Yes.
Okay.
No, it wasn't in this class.
Okay,
It's just like it's one of my favorite movies, and we talked about it on one of the podcast episodes, and like there's a reason it fit. Anyways, it also that movie still haunts me too because I'm like with where AI's at, I'm like they're gonna take over.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I also just read another like post-apocalyptic book about that where like that's what happens is like they have that same sort of like thing, like their job is to protect humanity, but the way that like the AI interprets those rules, right, like it gets twisted out of perspective, and like like that's anyways
you might need to take a break.
That's
from
a rabbit hole.
Okay,
that's a rabbit hole. That's a rabbit hole.
Faith and film.
Faith and film. And one of the like the beginning of the class, like we watched some great films. It's like Silence, Babette's Feast.
Heard of it.
Which is, have you seen Babette's Feast?
It's been a long time, but
God,
it's been a minute. I need to come back to that one.
So some like really good, solid movies like that like lead to these amazing discussions. Romero, we watched that one in that class too.
Oh, about Oscar.
Yeah.
Okay.
And one of the books that we read was like talking about like sacrifice. Yeah. And like I couldn't. Like in my mind, when I think of the word sacrifice, it's about self-sacrifice. What do I sacrifice? What do I give up? What's my whatever? And like it didn't jive with like the things that were being prompted with. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And then like when it finally like I had like my professor sat down with me like one-on-one, and he was like, did you not read the book? And I was like, it just doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
And then so he finally like got me to really understand is sort of like no. It's who else are you sacrificing on this altar? And so thinking about our world, right? So like on the altar of capitalism, who do we sacrifice on that altar? On the altar of Christianity, who do we sacrifice there, right? And so like on the altar of power. And so that's where, that's where it is. Like everyone that has power has to make sacrifices. And for the very first time in my life, I heard it differently. Because when I hear like the person, like you have to make sacrifices, it's not a personal sacrifice. You're sacrificing someone else.
You're putting somebody else up. And especially I think especially as
to keep power, you have to make sacrifices.
And I think that's
but to hear that phrase in a whole new way. You're not sacrificing anything. Someone else is. On your behalf.
And I think we see this throughout Scripture. Like, I mean, I think this is, be it, any of the martyrdoms of the apostles and all that kind of stuff in the rest of the New Testament. The slaughter of the innocents, even the plague with the killing the babies and all that kind of stuff. Like, I feel like we see this throughout. Is like when power is threatened, this is how power responds, and when power is vulnerable, what they do is they find the next most vulnerable person or group or thing and all that kind of stuff. And in this place, it's this kind of rogue Jewish movement that is following this guy named Jesus that is preaching about doing justice, loving mercy, walking humbly. Like it's preaching a counter message, and that becomes the vulnerable one in this situation and all that. So
I could be like, and then part of it I think is a little bit ignorance, and like it's actually kind of embarrassing. Part of it is ignorance, but I think part of it's also like privilege. Like I come from a place of privilege that like I'm not generally the person that's sacrificed, and so like that like my brain couldn't even conceptualize that, right? And so to think about that in a new way, which frankly with where since that time in place in our country to where we're at now is really easy for me to get, right? Like who's being sacrificed on the altar? And currently it's trans folks, it's particularly trans young folks. Like this is, we live in a fear-mongering politics, right? Like, tell people what to be afraid of and who to blame for it, right? Okay, so like on the altar of power, of having governmental power, which is very similar to what Herod's doing, right? On the altar of this keeping or maintaining or gaining this governmental power, who has to be sacrificed on that altar for you to get it?
To be able to get it and to be able to hold on to it.
And we're very much in that time and place of like who's being sacrificed on this altar.
And I mean, and it's not a new story. I mean, it's nothing new. I mean, this has been going on since the beginning of time. But I think when we start to think about like this idea of like how, if we say Christianity is something that is breaking chains and freeing and liberating and all these things, right? I mean, I think this is so much of the liberation gospel and all that kind of stuff, and the work that Dr. Cohn and Gutierrez and all that did as well. Is like, if we actually think that this is going to be liberating to the most vulnerable people, that means a complete reversal of the systems that have been, that we've been a part of. And right, like, I mean, I'd say it all the time, and I'd say it to my students, like, I'm a straight white landowning Christian male. Like I have all of that, and I would be able to just float through life no matter what happens, but at whose expense? And I think that's the question that keeps coming around. And I think that's the question, especially why I love campus ministries. I think those are some of the questions younger generations are asking a lot more than my generation did. And certainly, I mean, every generation has their thing, but like, I think there's a realization that like there are bigger powers of play and bigger structures in play.
So a few years ago, I led a campus ministry retreat for the campus ministries of the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and Delaware. They meet up once a year in Ocean City, obviously, and have a campus ministry retreat. And I was leading the theology that weekend. They brought me in as the theologian. And I made them do an activity.
Okay.
First of all, we watched the movie WALL-E.
Oh,
along
yeah,
these
classic.
themes, and
Oh,
like,
yeah. Oh, gosh.
Which, by the way,
Christine
like,
Myers Parker.
I had
Christine Myers Parker
never
loves-
had felt so old.
Yeah.
When like these college students had never seen it.
Never
and I
seen
was
it.
like,
Mhm.
oh.
The-
They had also never seen Mean Girls, and I realized like they were born
Yeah.
after it came out, and I was like, that movie defined
Yeah,
my
this
life.
is my life.
Wait,
No,
anyways.
we were having a conversation about Shrek recently, and all of them were like, Shrek came out after I was born. I was like, how did Shrek come out after you were born? That's not a real thing.
You mean before?
No, like, yeah. Shrek came, sorry. Yeah, Shrek came out before they were born, and I just was shocked that was like
wild.
a real thing, that
Yep.
like they have such this like lineage. Like, they're Shrek raves. Like, these are big time things. Yeah, Shrek raves that my students have talked about. But like, yeah, they're like, oh yeah, that came out 5 years before I was born. I was like, that is not a real
wild,
thing.
yeah.
But sorry,
Older every
Wall-E.
day. No. So like, so along the same theme of like talking about capitalism and sort of the result of that and stuff like that. So like that was sort of, we had started a Bible study there. And then like the part 2 was I made them do an activity, and I made every single one of them look inside the label of their shirt.
Yeah.
And then go and research where the shirt was made, what factory, who made it, what are the company's policies, who gets, how do they treat them, what do they do, right? And like to have a discussion about what did you learn, who was being sacrificed at the altar of you buying that shirt at Old Navy. You know, like, does that make sense?
Yeah, no, 100%. Because I, right, and this, I feel like this is such the hard thing, because like there's so many ways in which we're complicit in systems that are bigger than us, without us even realizing it or knowing it. So like it feels hard to have conversations around it, because it's like, well, what alternatives?
Well, that's what we
do you
talked about,
have?
right? The difference between sort of like structural sins. So like, like there are sins that are just inherent to the systems, and like, you as a person might be a good person. You might recycle, eat ethically, buy ethically, source, like all the things. Like, we try our very best. Yeah. But as a white woman who was born of white parents who were landowners and entrepreneurs and were gifted with higher education, I was also like, it wasn't just that like, are you going to college? It was what college? Like, it was assumed like you are going to college, right? Like, that wasn't a it was never. It wasn't an option,
a conversation,
right? Like, it wasn't which one are you going to, right? Like, kind of thing. And I benefit from systems that are built on the backs of other people for hundreds of years. Yeah. Whether I want to, whether I mean to, whether I am implicitly or explicitly involved in it, it just, that is the reality of the human structural crap that we've built. Right. And so to acknowledge that, and that's why I really like our Lutheran like confession and forgiveness, right? Like the things known and unknown, the things done and left undone. Right. And there's a big one in that too, right? That just to say that, like, and we do it together for a reason, right? Like, we as humans that benefit from these systems, like, we have sacrificed someone on the altar, and we don't even know that. Like, necessarily understand it.
It almost feels like we need to put an asterisk in that liturgy or something like that. But go research. Like, there needs to be an asterisk of like, but you need to really find out what are those.
Why
things?
are we actually saying this?
Yeah, why are we saying these things, and what are the known and unknown things?
I've shared this before, and I've shared this in a lot of places. Like a really good resource. I really like Cynthia Molibito's book, Resisting Structural Evil. Yeah, and really talks about that, and talks about like everything from like, what's happening with global warming and the natural disasters and the rates, and like who it's affecting and why, and like to understand that like 1% of the population emits so much of this carbon and stuff like that, and consumes more than the rest of the world combined, right? But then like the other people are the ones who are actually suffering.
Those are the ones that are suffering from. Those in the global south, those in those places.
The people in the global south are the ones that are suffering for the people in the global north's consumption. Yeah. And we have like, that's a thing that like, well, I mean, we can't even conceptualize. Like, we don't.
But that's a little bit. But that's also part of the fascinating movement, is that like from a Christianity standpoint, like the center of the Christian church is moving into the global south, right? Like, I mean, like, there is definite movement of like where Christianity.
The most Lutherans in the world are?
Tanzania, right? That's the biggest Lutheran seminary in the world is in Tanzania. Like,
everyone's like, Norway. Nope, wrong.
Nope. But that seems to be the piece,
Just
though,
more
is that
people.
just the volume's there. But that seems to be the piece, though, is that like especially as Western Christians, like the way in which this now, looking at this Herod text and all that kind of stuff, and the beheading of John the Baptist, now that the vulnerable that were leaving, it's not just that they're just people on the other side of the world that might believe something or don't believe anything. Like, these are also just Christians that we're affecting. So like, it is one of those like situations where I feel like, I mean, if Christianity wants to do something, we have to start with keeping our own house and like start building up and building out from there. Because, and I think that's been a lot of the work that's been happening, you know, around the ELCA or so over the past few years, is like actually leaning into the places where we're putting the vulnerable in the church on the altar first, and who are the people that are getting exploited in and around the church first and foremost, and like
naming it and owning it and talking about it. And that's where I always like to direct people to the ELCA social statements page, because people don't even know that we have those. And they're like, oh, I didn't know the church had a statement on this. I'm like, well, like a lot of the statements, like, and some of them have been there since 1990.
Well, yeah,
like they're old. Like they're from the conception.
One is from the 90s.
Yep,
like,
91.
There's an immigration one from
91.
the 90s. There is some of those.
The death penalty, 91.
The death penalty, yeah, it's like
91.
Yeah, this is nothing that's new.
Right, and people were like, oh, I didn't know the church had stances on these.
Yeah.
And like, and in the best ELCA fashion, right? Like they're very much like living into the gray area.
Yeah.
Like, do we agree with death?
Sure.
Killing people? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But like, life doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah,
And like,
that's
you know,
not the
like,
way the world is.
And do we agree with abortion? Not necessarily, but like life doesn't work that way, right? Like that's essentially just, you know, the ELCA stance on
just
everything.
about everything. And but it gives the opportunity, though, I think, for us to be able to, I mean, those seem to be some of the most clear documents from the ELCA of seeing like, these are the things that we care about, and these are the things that like our congregations and communities should be focusing on and pointing towards, of like, these are the vulnerable, and we actually have something to say about that, and we actually care about that. And I think, once again, that would probably be a perplexing thing, right? I mean, I think that, once again, getting back to this idea that like Herod was kind of like intrigued by John the Baptist because, and once again, like I feel like I see this on campus, is that like when you are about a life of discipleship that is actually caring for the vulnerable and looking for the ways in which the Spirit's working and looking for the ways in which like we need to be better as Christians, like that looks different from the rest of the world. And I think that looks different from what most folks think like daily American life is, like because it is so much easier to just like, well, I know my people, I know my community, I know where I fit in. I'm not going to step outside of my comfort zone because I don't have to. I mean, because that is where we are as like a Western society, is that like you have to seek out discomfort. Like you have to seek out the places where you are going to be uncomfortable because you are being confronted with things that you normally never have to think about or consider. And I think, once again, it's a weird text, but like I think texts like these like pull us out of that comfort area of being like, here is a vulnerable person, and look at it, don't look away.
Every preacher on Sunday is going to be like,
yeah. But these are the ones that are so fun to preach, though. Like, these are the ones that are fun to preach.
I agree.
Like,
I mean, I agree, but, you know, I've made a living off of this. A lot of pastors do not.
Fair. Yeah. It's like, I don't want to preach on a healing story. I don't know what to do with a healing story of Jesus, but, like, you give me something like the beheading of John the Baptist. Yeah, Jesus healed somebody. Great, cool. Jesus walked on water. Great, cool. Like, that's awesome. But give me the beheading of John the Baptist, because I think
an agent of the state.
Yeah, an agent of the state carrying out violence against a person of faith, because what they were preaching and living and doing was different. A minority person of faith, because what they were doing didn't look like what the state wanted them to. And I think that is just such a fascinating angle for the church to say, no, we still have something to say to the world, and we still have something to say to society, and we still have something to say to our communities, that like, this is the reality of the world, is that like, if you stand up for justice or you stand up for the vulnerable, you are going to be at risk. I mean, like, you are making yourself vulnerable in those moments, and that's exactly what we're called to do, is like to be vulnerable in all the spaces we enter into, and to stand with the vulnerable in all the places where they already are and we're just catching up to. Yeah.
And understanding, like, I do. So someone said this week at they did like a how would you call it? What did Robert say yesterday? It was like the geographical biography. That was it.
Oh yeah. Geographical
biography.
Yeah, geographical biography.
Sometimes I want to do like, I want to hear someone's like, for us to take stock of our own like privilege biography.
Oh, that would be interesting.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like, because everyone's is a little different, right? Like, again, like, I am still a white woman from educated human beings that had land and money, and like, not a lot of money, right? Like, normal middle of the
whatever
road,
like middle class was in the 80s,
money,
90s,
right?
whatever
Exactly.
that
It was
looked like.
that kind of money.
Yeah. Whatever that was then.
We had 2 cars. We had right, like understanding like we always had food. There was never a question like, is there going to be food on the table? There was never a question of my education.
Yeah.
There was never a question of
we'll go on a family vacation.
Yes,
you'll
all
go to
those
summer.
things,
You'll
right?
go to
Like,
summer camp. You will go to college.
understanding my economic privileges as well as my race privileges,
Yeah.
as well as my educational privileges,
Yeah.
and like as well as even I would say even a geographical privilege, right? Like I lived in a place where like we were humans that own our own house, right? Like we didn't share with other families.
Yeah.
I lived in a place that was like fairly safe from most natural disasters.
Yeah.
Other than extreme snow.
Which
Other than that,
that sounds terrible.
Oh, and tornadoes. We had
yeah,
those
I was
too.
gonna say you get a little bit of that, but like you probably had like grass in your yard, right? You didn't have to like grow produce, like
Correct,
maybe you
yeah.
had a small family garden, but like
but
you
for
didn't have
fun.
to use for fun.
For
It wasn't
fun.
like to actually sustain your
Correct,
family.
yeah.
You didn't have to like work the land
Exactly.
to be able to do anything
I had
like that.
2 parents,
Yeah.
right? Like I had 2 human beings in my household that like made money and took care of the children, and you know, like it's when you start to take stock of some of these things and really realize like where you are on the scale of the world, right? So like when we think about going into spaces, to me anyways, when you go into spaces where you're talking about stand with the vulnerable and recognize, and how do you do that? Like you first need to take stock of the privileges that you have.
Mm-hmm,
right? Like, and so, you know, I obviously get discriminated against in a lot of ways and places and spaces, right? But like, I still have all of these. Like,
you still have all,
I still have a lot of like privileged capital. Right.
Yeah.
That like is a blessing from God. Right. Like I've been incredibly blessed that like I like these are gifts that like I didn't earn and whatever. Right. Like it was a matter of my birth. Right.
Yeah.
Like and so you know it's a both and, but like also understanding that like you still have those gifts.
Yeah.
And to understand that people are born in the world without those.
Without that.
Without any number of those, without any land, without sustainable food sources, without
without
family,
any of those
without
things.
parents, without what you know what I'm saying, like without even just like the privilege of color,
Yeah.
without even just the privilege of being born a United States citizen.
Yeah. Like whatever like side of an imaginary line you're born on really makes
It does.
Yeah.
I learned that like very quickly. Like I have a blue passport.
Yeah.
And that
means something
in this world.
Well, and then you even get more into it once you get into the United States of like what zip code you're born into, like has a greater determining factor of like your success in life and in the world and all that kind of stuff, just because you were born into one zip code and not a different zip code.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things for me that like I feel so passionately about for campus ministry as well, is that like especially at like big state institutions, like you have students from all walks and corners of life. Like one of my favorite groups on campus is like the first generation female engineering like group, because like these are women who they're the first woman from their family to go to college, and they were the first woman that's going to go major in engineering from like one of the top public engineering schools in the country, and like nobody else in their family has ever gone to college before, and like how massive of a thing that is for their family to be able to say like, and for all these like privileged kids from the Atlanta suburbs to be like, oh wait, this is somebody from rural Georgia who like is right here sharing their stories with us, but like is absolutely brilliant as well, and is like a phenomenal at STEM and all these types of things, and like. And I think that's one of the things, like, we don't find that in other aspects of society, is these places where, like, you have the vulnerable and the invulnerable, unvulnerable, whatever the other side of, like
inflammable.
Inflammable.
Which
Like,
mean the
right,
same
you have the
thing.
people with privilege, like, walking alongside of and going to classes alongside of the vulnerable. And you have those chances to, like, break down some of those barriers in ways you don't have in other parts of society. And, like, maybe the church is supposed to be that, but, like, the church isn't necessarily great at doing that. Of like, oh, we're actually going to welcome everybody, and everybody's going to have a place here at the table. But
No,
like,
we like to divide people.
It makes a lot more sense to have the good white. Well, I talk about this with when I'm talking about some of these differences is like, so did internship first call in Oregon, and out in Astoria, Oregon, which is like where they filmed the Goonies, like at the very like northwest tip of like where the Columbia River meets the Pacific. There are two Lutheran churches, like, and I mix them up, but like one's Norwegian and one's Finnish, and they have nothing to do with each other, even though they're both ELCA Lutherans. And like one was in like terrible financial situation, and like the other one refused to help them out through their like financial challenges and all that kind of stuff, just because they were a different ethnic group that was them, even though they're both white and Scandinavian and ELCA Lutheran in a very small town. But like where else do you find folks coming up against folks from other walks of life, but on college campuses, and having that chance to actually have the opportunity to meet and journey and experience the vulnerable in our midst than in places like that?
Yeah.
It's a weird aside. How do you feel about John's disciples? Because these are also folks that I feel very interested in looking into a little bit.
Yeah, here's my thing about John's disciples. The podcast listeners are no strangers to me calling Jesus' disciples little bitches.
Yeah.
Like, those little bitches ran and hid in a room.
Oh, yeah, they ran and hid real fast.
Yeah. Like, here's also the thing, like, it's my big soapbox, like, with Thomas, right? That all these little bitches are hiding in a room, and, like, Jesus comes to talk to them, and then they go and see Thomas, and they're like, Jesus is risen. And he was like, I'm not going to believe it until I see him. And they were like, oh, ye of little faith. And we're like, well, you saw him.
You saw him. Yeah,
that's not even fair. Also, like, why were you all hiding and you didn't even invite Thomas to the party? How rude.
How rude is that in the first place?
But so John has very different disciples.
Disciples.
They went and, like, found him?
They went and gathered up his body and took him and did things with him. We're like, Jesus' disciples run and hide at the moment's notice. Like, even when...
Thank God
when
for
he was
Joseph
arrested. Yeah, thank God for Joseph Arimathea actually coming through in the clutch. My guy showing up when it matters. But but I think that's an interesting juxtaposition as well, as like these folks, and maybe because John was a little bit more out there, and maybe because he pushed things a little bit farther or whatever, but like we actually have people that are showing up to say like, no, this person meant something to us and we're going to actually go and collect them. But like, I usually love the disciples, though. The disciples are some of my favorites because they just screw up constantly. Like, they are the comedic relief throughout the Gospels, in my opinion.
That's another VHism, the disciples.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, there it is. Yep. There it is, yeah. Oh, we went out and tried to heal people, and it didn't work. Well, did you pray? Oh, no, we forgot to pray. Yeah. Oh, damn.
Well, also, like, especially the Gospel of Mark, too, right?
Mark especially. Yeah. But I think this entire thing is just good foreshadowing of like what we're going to be seeing, but also some of the realities of how terrifying it can be in the world. Is that like the disciples didn't want to show up for the vulnerable because we're also human. Like they didn't want to show up for Jesus in those moments, also because we're human and flawed, and we're going to screw it up more times than we get it right. And
I don't know what it means, but I am like really curious that like if there is an intentional dichotomy from the author that John's disciples show up and Jesus's don't.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, there's probably a literary thing there that like there's a reason that is juxtaposition, and I'm not necessarily sure what it is.
Yeah.
Other than the women going to be the hero in the end,
which is great. I mean, maybe that's what the entire plot motif is going.
That's
on
what
here.
The whole church is. That's what the women are actually the heroes,
and there's something there. I feel like there has to be something there that like, hey, let's all pay attention here to what actually is the truth of our communities, is that when the men don't show up, the women show up regardless, and that's a truth.
When shit gets hard.
Yeah, when shit gets hard, the women are going to be there and the guys are going to go run and all that. Because I do think this is great foreshadowing, right? Like John's beheading is foreshadowing for Jesus's, the disciples. I mean, like I think there are a lot of literary things that are going on here that like, once again, somebody probably explained to me at some point in seminary that I missed on it.
Me and I'm like, there's a thing there.
Yeah, there's a thing there.
I don't know what it is, and that's I give that to preachers that are listening that are like thinking about trying to find that angle. And you didn't like all the capitalism and death in society that we talked about. You could like maybe find that, like, what is that connection?
What is that there?
Yeah.
Well, and in a similar way, like I know we're not necessarily going to talk about the Hebrew scripture, but like the reading also, like we have something from Amos, and it's that whole plumb line thing. And like also, once again, like I sure somebody explained this to me multiple times in seminary, like Marty Stevens, thank you. But like I do not think I really fully follow exactly this whole plumb line thing. But like once again, it's this justice piece of like, once again, God is calling us to justice for the vulnerable, and that's what we're being called to. I mean, the prophets are my favorite. Like of all the scripture, like the prophets are my absolute favorite pieces of scripture to dive into, because you get this like actually like, no, y'all are paying attention to the wrong things, the vulnerable, the ones. Yeah. And Jesus then having to come and every time. And so I think we get that there also, that there must be some sort of through line from that Amos. And once again, folks that are more tied into the lectionary, or preachers that are more like ready to do that exegetical work could probably find something there. Because,
well, that's why that is the reading, the first reading.
Yeah, Mm-hmm.
Those people that design the Revised Common Lectionary that I don't like, but I don't have a better solution, so we go with it. They did make intentional decisions about things.
Decisions were made, and this was a very conscious one. Mm-hmm. But that there's something there of like the foreshadowing that we're getting of like what's to be coming for Jesus, and to like once again be keyed into the motifs of when you see power threatened, power lashes out
Yeah.
against the vulnerable. And I
Yeah.
think that's what is happening here. And I think that's what we see in Jesus's crucifixion and all that kind of stuff, and throughout other places.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, it's fun.
This is fun.
Super metal.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is awesome.
This is a great conversation.
Really fun.
Again, this is why I'm just so flattered all the time that people like continue to like let me do this for
Oh,
a
yeah.
job. Like
Oh,
it's
yeah.
fantastic.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
it's my it's life giving for me very much.
100%.
So. I'll also say this. I'm actually still just absolutely honored and flattered and blessed that like because of this work on the podcast, I did receive. I won an award this weekend.
Oh, did you? Wait, what?
Did you not go to the
I was there.
last
I was
night?
there.
Where
I was
the
there.
hell were you at?
I was there. Sorry, I thought you meant like like you got some sort of podcasting award from some.
No,
place, but
just a church. Just
okay,
a church
brag
award.
on yourself.
Yeah,
Brag
yeah,
on
yeah.
yourself. Show
Oh, I'm
out.
sorry.
Show out. Show off. What'd you win?
I won the Sittler award for just excellent theology.
Yeah. But in the public space,
In the public
the
space.
very
Yep.
specifically this
Yep.
isn't just like behind closed doors Lutheran circles only. This
so
is
thank you for those that nominated me and how beautiful that is. And it's quite an honor to say that this is something that like I am very passionate about and so grateful for. And
yeah.
And
it's being recognized. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's being recognized as being something that is right. It's not the danger award that we gave out last night, but like it is stepping out into
danger award, yeah.
Well, because it was like risk taking in something else, and Sarah
Yeah.
said it was risk taking in danger, and I kind of like that angle.
Yeah.
But like, I mean, but this is the once again the places where we are called to be stepping out. People step out in the ways that make sense, and you're doing that with this work. And I think it was really awesome to see the community kind of recognize that.
Yeah.
When did it click that it was going to be you? Because like the way they do their awards is like they read.
Yeah, they
They
do.
read
They
the
be
nomination thing, but they take out the person's name. They take out some of like the
Yeah.
details that might like key in of like we are giving this award to AJ,
So
and
I
then
wasn't
so and
like
so.
totally paying attention
Oh, yeah.
because I had just won that scholarship.
Oh, the Traveler Scholarship.
And so, like-
are we breaking news right now to your wife that you got the?
Oh no, I did text her.
Okay,
That's why,
good.
because that's what I was doing. Is I like texted her, and so I applied for this travel scholarship.
Yeah.
And so I apply for things, and I like assume I'm
just
never
do
going to
it.
hear
Yeah.
from them ever again, right? Like
That's usually the way that works.
yeah, exactly. And so like that's what I thought that was happening. So like
Yeah.
I didn't even tell her, hey, I applied for this thing. And so I was awarded a $7,000
Yeah.
just like continuing ed
Yeah.
travel scholarship to go to Germany
Yeah.
to learn about the things I specifically want to learn about, which was Lutheranism as it overlaps with like the Holocaust, and particularly when and how the folks of LGBT folks in the Holocaust
Yeah.
and how they were treated. And
Yeah.
I won that.
You won
like,
that one.
I was like, and so like I'm in the middle of
It's
texting my
still
wife
reeling.
because I'd gotten up to the microphone because they were like, "Do you want to say a couple words?" And I was like, "I didn't tell my wife that I did
That was
this."
just pure gold. Pure gold. That was just the most incredible
So I was in the
moment.
middle of like texting my wife to
Yeah.
be like, "Oh, I did this thing, and like I actually won it. Like
We
I'm
got
really
it.
excited about it. This is like great. Like I don't like I like now like I have to like plan this trip.
now
and,
we
like,
actually
this
have to
whole thing,
follow through on
like,
it.
And so I was in the middle of like doing that, and all of a sudden I heard the phrase, "Things that pastors wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole,"
Oh,
and I
okay.
was like,
okay, that's what I thought.
yeah,
that's what I
that was
thought
the
it
phrase because
yeah.
that came up way before the word podcast came up, and
Yeah.
then like a couple of paragraphs later, you hear the word podcast,
Yeah.
and I was like, which one?
Damn
like,
it, it's
what?
me.
So I start paying attention to what's happening. So
good.
It was such a beautiful
It's so
honor.
good.
I just
Yeah.
I also like don't pay attention super closely to a lot of the awards because like I feel like I'm not in a place in my career that like
Yeah.
I'm award winning
Yeah,
anything, right? Like I'm just like hitting the bare
Still
minimum,
figuring it
doing the
out,
things,
yeah.
figuring it out. So I was like, wait a minute.
Wait.
I heard a thing.
That sounds like
so It was
me.
incredible, but I did say that I am going to put on the website all the things. This is now an award-winning.
It's
podcast.
an award-winning
It
podcast.
is an
Yeah, I
award-winning
think you need
podcast, so
to
that's where we're at.
take that to the bank.
100%.
Maybe we
like
can
my
get you a
other-
plaque to put on the wall, like your YouTube 100 like
Yeah, it
million
was like
followers.
of my office.
Yeah.
I like we like this is a fully digital space.
Yeah,
That's what,
fully-
like, we did the it's like they sent me like my certificate for reconciling works. They actually sent it to the Synod office, and they're like, "Do you want us to keep it? Do you want to send it?" Like I was like, "I guess I could put it up in my
Put it up in
office."
the
I
office.
don't know. No one's ever gonna see it.
okay.
Like, anyways.
When you pivot to video, then you just need to have that Sittler award behind you. I think
video,
that's what
and
you
it's just like it's not
Not-
not
no,
worth it, yeah.
not the way.
Anyways, yeah, not the way. Anyways,
not the way.
thank you everyone for joining
Yeah,
us.
congratulations.
Thank you,
Congratulations.
Pastor Rickel, for joining us
Oh,
today,
yeah.
and for this really difficult conversation, which I appreciate. But anyways, We're almost done with this season, so please come back next week for our last episode. And remember that you can always learn more about the podcast and find more episodes at 10footballpodcast.com. And follow us on Facebook and Instagram at 10football podcast, and of course wherever you listen to podcasts. And remember, the 10 Football Podcast is a ministry of the Delaware Maryland Synod. To learn more, go to demdsynod.org.
There we go.
Take care.
Go Maryland.